It was 1943, in the quiet streets of Haarlem, Netherlands. A park bench sat empty except for a woman, unaware that her life was about to end. Approaching her was a girl, barely 16, with braided hair swinging as she walked. She seemed innocent, even fragile, a child in the eyes of anyone passing by. "What's your name?" the girl asked softly. The woman answered. And in the same moment, the teenager drew a pistol, locked eyes with her target, and fired. The woman collapsed. Moments later, the girl mounted her bicycle and disappeared into the city streets. Her name was Freddy Oversteegen, 16 years old. The woman she had just killed was a Dutch collaborator carrying a list of every Jewish family in the region, names, addresses, families about to be handed over to the Nazis. Hundreds would have died if Freddy hadn't acted. That day, she saved them all. By the war's end, Freddy and her sister would eliminate dozens of Nazi officers and collaborators. No one could say exactly how many, they didn't talk about numbers. Freddy's answer was always the same. One should not ask a soldier about such things. This is the story of two teenage girls who became lethal in an occupied country. Girls who seduced German officers to lure them into forests, who trained in secret underground sheds, who refused to kill children, and who somehow kept their humanity while fighting monsters. Early life. Freddy Oversteegen was born in 1925 in Schoten, a small village near Haarlem. Her childhood was far from ordinary. Her family lived on a houseboat, her father earning little, her mother, Truus, a committed activist who believed in action against injustice. When Freddy was young, her parents separated. Her father sang a French farewell from the ship's deck and vanished from her life. Her mother moved Freddy and her sister Truus into a cramped apartment in Haarlem. Mattresses were stuffed with straw, rooms were sparse, yet Truus always made room for others, Jewish refugees, political exiles, anyone fleeing Nazi persecution. The sisters grew up sharing their beds with strangers whose names they didn't always know. They made dolls for children suffering in foreign conflicts, and learned that helping others often demanded sacrifice. Truus taught them one rule. To help others, you must be willing to give yourself. A lesson they would never forget. The occupation begins May 10, 1940. Nazi Germany invaded the Netherlands. The Dutch army resisted for 5 days, then surrendered. Freddy was 14, Truus 16. Overnight, the streets filled with German soldiers. Nazi flags hung from buildings, and terror became routine. Doors were battered open with rifle butts, screams filling the neighborhoods. Yet the Oversteegens did not hide. They resisted. By night, Freddy and Truus joined their mother distributing illegal pamphlets and anti-Nazi newspapers. They pasted their messages over propaganda posters. The Netherlands must be free! Their hearts raced with every patrol they evaded on bicycles, yet they were never caught. Word of their courage reached the Haarlem Council of Resistance, part of the underground fight against Nazi occupation. In 1941, Commander Franz van der Waal came to recruit them. He needed to know they were capable, so he tested them. Dressed as a Gestapo officer, he stormed their apartment, demanding information on a hidden Jew. Freddy and Truus did not flinch. They defended themselves, refusing to betray anyone, even under threat of death. Van der Waal revealed the truth and welcomed them into the resistance. "You'll learn to sabotage bridges, railways, and yes, to shoot Nazis," he said. Freddy grinned at her sister. "Well, that's something I've never done before." Truus's final advice echoed. "Always stay human." Training in secret in a hidden underground potato shed, the sisters learned the deadly arts of war. How to hold a weapon. How to aim. How to stay calm. Their first missions were acts of sabotage, burning Nazi warehouses guarded by SS soldiers. Freddy and Truus would approach the guards, charm them with conversation and laughter, while the resistance set the fires behind them. It worked perfectly. Soon, their missions grew deadlier. Their targets were collaborators, Dutch citizens betraying their neighbors, handing over lists of Jewish families. One such mission led Freddy to a park bench. The target, a woman working for the Nazis, had a list that would have condemned hundreds. Freddy approached casually, asked her name, confirmed it, and fired. She escaped on her bicycle, her first act of deadly resistance complete. Becoming unstoppable, the sisters perfected their techniques. Sometimes one would distract a Nazi officer in a bar or tavern while the other waited in the forest. Officers were lured with charm and innocence, only to meet their end under the trees. Sometimes Freddy would shoot from a moving bicycle, Truus pedaling swiftly past unsuspecting targets. Their youth and appearance were weapons more effective than guns. In 1943, a third fighter joined, Hanny Shaft, a law student with red hair and sharp intellect. Hanny had refused to pledge loyalty to Germany, and after being expelled, she joined the resistance. Together, Freddy, Truus, and Hanny became a lethal trio. Hanny planned and strategized, Truus led with courage, and Freddy scouted and executed with precision. The year was 1943, and Haarlem lay under the heavy shadow of German occupation. The streets, once bustling with the sounds of bicycles clattering over cobblestones and merchants calling out from their stalls, now carried a muted tension, the distant rumble of boots echoing on pavements lined with Nazi flags. On a cold, gray afternoon, a young girl, barely 16, pedaled cautiously along a narrow lane, the wind tugging at her braided hair. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over every corner, every alleyway, alert to the presence of German patrols. To the casual observer, she was merely a teenager on her bicycle, hair swaying with the rhythm of the pedals, innocent and unassuming. But she carried with her a weight that few could comprehend, a responsibility that pressed on her chest like a stone. In her basket, beneath a layer of cloth, a small pistol rested, cold and ready, a tool that would determine life or death in the next few moments. She approached a park bench tucked beneath the skeletal branches of a leafless tree. On the bench sat a woman, middle-aged, scanning a worn notebook, unaware of the girl's presence. The girl's gaze locked onto her target, memorizing the subtle gestures of her shoulders, the tilt of her head, the way her hands trembled slightly as she turned a page. There was a quiet, deliberate patience in the girl's movements, each pedal stroke measured, each breath controlled. When she reached the bench, she dismounted, the soft scrape of rubber against cobblestone masked by the distant hum of a tram. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice steady, almost childlike, inviting trust where there should have been suspicion. The woman looked up, startled, perhaps sensing nothing more than a harmless child, and answered. The girl nodded, eyes narrowing slightly as she confirmed the identity of the target. In one smooth motion, she drew the pistol, fingers tightening around the grip, and pressed it to the life she had been tasked to end. The shot rang sharp and final. The woman slumped, a muted gasp lost in the gray air. There was no celebration, no relief, only the sudden, oppressive silence of a city living in fear. The girl mounted her bicycle once more and rode away, weaving through streets where shadows clung to buildings, aware that every glance from a neighbor, every whisper, could betray her. She was Freddy Oversteegen, 16 years old, and the life she had just taken had spared hundreds from certain death. The woman had been a collaborator, carrying a list of Jewish families whose names and addresses would have been handed to the Nazis, an inventory of lives marked for transport, imprisonment, and execution. That list, that single document, could have extinguished entire households, and now it lay in the grip of history, averted by the actions of a single, resolute teenager. Freddy's sister, Truus, trained alongside her in the shadows of the city, had already begun to master similar skills, both girls learning to navigate a world where innocence could be a weapon, and youth a disguise. Their mother, Trenchy, had instilled in them from a young age the imperative of courage and conscience. When injustice presented itself, one could not remain idle, one could not hide. And so the sisters acted, their actions carving a path of resistance in a world where submission was enforced by fear, bullets, and propaganda. The city itself seemed to pulse with danger, the narrow canals reflecting the gray skies above, the occasional flicker of uniformed officers appearing and disappearing around corners, their boots splashing through puddles left by a recent rain. Freddy and Truus had grown accustomed to this choreography of surveillance and evasion. At night, they would move silently along the streets, past shuttered windows and empty squares, distributing pamphlets that defied the occupiers, messages pasted over German propaganda posters with hastily mixed glue and paper, proclaiming that the Netherlands must remain free. Their hearts would pound, synchronized with the rhythm of their breaths and the clatter of their tires, every corner a potential threat, every shadow a possible end. Yet they persisted, unbroken, learning the limits of their courage, and the capacity for moral judgment amidst chaos. When Frans van der Waal, commander of the Haarlem Council of Resistance, came to recruit them, he tested their resolve with deception, masquerading as a Gestapo officer demanding to know the whereabouts of a hidden Jew. Freddy and Truus did not falter. They met aggression with restraint and ingenuity, refusing to betray anyone, even under the imminent threat of death. In that moment, they were no longer children. They were agents of survival, trained in the subtle calculus of life and death. From that day forward, they were taught the methods of sabotage, to fire a weapon with precision, to blend charm with strategy, to use youth as a weapon as much as muscle or gunpowder. In the cold confines of an underground potato shed, they learned to remain calm under the weight of fear, to calculate angles, to anticipate reaction, to carry out missions that required both patience and ruthlessness. Their early tasks were small in scale but precise in execution, setting fire to Nazi warehouses, diverting attention with laughter and conversation, while the resistance carried out its work unseen. Each success reinforced the truth that the human spirit could adapt, that innocence could be wielded as power, that even the smallest actors in history could bend the course of events. Their targets grew increasingly deliberate: collaborators, those who betrayed their neighbors for personal gain or ideology, whose actions endangered entire families. Freddy approached each with the same calculated precision, the same restraint, her hand steady even as her pulse raced, her mind balancing duty with conscience. There was no joy in taking life, only the grim satisfaction of survival and the imperative to prevent greater death. Each mission was rehearsed, each movement measured, from drawing a pistol to retreating into the city's veins on a bicycle, blending speed and subtlety, observation and intuition, knowing the difference between courage and recklessness, morality and expedience. The girls' choices were governed not by vengeance but by principle. Even as they eliminated collaborators, they refused to harm children, refused to cross the line between resistance and atrocity. Freddy and Truus learned that war demanded decisions that weighed heavily on the soul, that the measure of heroism was not in the number of enemies defeated but in the humanity preserved in the process. In their quiet moments, after missions, after the city had gone dark and the distant hum of occupation faded into a ghostly lull, they reflected on the enormity of their actions. They carried the memory of those they had saved as much as the memory of those they had taken, understanding that in the theater of occupation, even teenagers could wield decisions with consequences far beyond their own lives. The streets of Haarlem remained dangerous, a landscape of uncertainty, yet the sisters moved with a purpose, a discipline that grew out of necessity and conscience. Every pedal stroke, every whispered exchange, every glance at an officer's uniform, reinforced the rhythm of their silent rebellion, a rhythm dictated by courage, intelligence, and an unwavering moral compass. They were young yet seasoned, innocent yet deadly, human yet capable of actions that would be recorded in the shadows of history. Their work continued, each day a blend of fear, vigilance, and moral deliberation, their presence in the city a quiet but formidable assertion of resistance. The winter of 1943 had settled over Haarlem with a quiet severity, frost coating the edges of canals and transforming the cobblestone streets into slick, treacherous paths. The city itself seemed frozen, not just by cold, but by the weight of occupation. German soldiers patrolled in measured formations, boots crunching over frost-hardened ground, their rifles slung at the ready, eyes scanning for any sign of dissent. Under the gray skies, the city's canals mirrored the skeletal outlines of leafless trees, a silent witness to the creeping tension and pervasive fear. Freddy Oversteegen and her sister Truus had grown used to moving through this world with the precision of hunters, every pedal stroke on their bicycles deliberate, every glance measured, every breath calculated. They had learned the importance of patience, of reading the small, human details, a twitch of a shoulder, the angle of a helmet, the hesitant pause of a footstep. Each of these minor observations could mean the difference between life and death, between a mission completed and exposure to the Gestapo's wrath. That winter, the sisters' work had grown more daring. No longer merely distributing pamphlets or replacing propaganda posters, they now carried out direct action missions under the auspices of the Haarlem Council of Resistance, their bodies moving like shadows through the streets, through alleys lined with shuttered homes and abandoned storefronts. The faint smell of smoke from burning coal mixed with the metallic tang of frost-covered iron railings and the faint odor of damp straw from the canals. These were the streets where lives could be changed in a single instant, where innocence could be wielded as both shield and weapon. One afternoon, Truus led Freddy through a side street, both girls pedaling in synchrony, their tires making muted impressions in the thin layer of frost. They carried with them a plan that required meticulous timing. A Dutch collaborator had been identified as a threat, a man responsible for providing intelligence on Jewish families to German authorities. Freddy's basket contained a small pistol, wrapped in cloth, the weight familiar beneath her hands. They paused behind a low wall, breath visible in the cold air, listening to the distant steps of soldiers. The city seemed to hold its breath along with them, the faint creak of an iron gate, the whisper of wind along the rooftops, every noise amplified by the winter's stillness. Freddy stepped forward, her voice soft and casual, asking a question that masked the lethal intent behind it. The man turned unsuspecting, caught off guard by the childlike innocence in her tone, and in a single precise movement, Freddy acted. The gunshot was muted by the thick winter air, absorbed into the frost and brickwork. The man fell, and Freddy felt the weight of both action and consequence press down on her. She mounted her bicycle and merged into the streets, the city returning to its ordinary rhythm as if nothing had occurred, though everything had changed for her. The sisters had refined these methods over months, learning the rhythms of the city, the patterns of the enemy, the way human behavior could be predicted and used. They learned to move as a unit, silently communicating, anticipating reactions, measuring the distance and timing necessary to strike without detection. Each mission brought a new sense of responsibility, a profound awareness that the lives they were protecting, hundreds of families, entire communities, depended on their precision and restraint. The cold also forced a new type of endurance. Bicycles were difficult to handle on icy streets, and the weight of hidden weapons added tension to the arms and shoulders. The sisters learned to keep their bodies loose, their minds alert, balancing the physical demands with the psychological pressure of knowing that a single misstep could mean their deaths. In this winter, another figure emerged alongside them, Hanny Shaft, a young woman whose fiery red hair marked her as both striking and dangerous. Hanny came from a middle-class family in Amsterdam, trained in law, accustomed to reason and debate rather than bullets and covert operations. But the war had stripped away choice from her. Her refusal to pledge loyalty to the Nazis had ended her studies, and she had joined the resistance. With Hanny, Freddy and Truus found an ally who complemented their skills. She was cerebral, calculating, always analyzing every move, every potential outcome. Her presence transformed the sisters' operations, allowing them to coordinate more complex sabotage. Bridges weakened to collapse under military convoys, railway lines carefully sabotaged to halt deportation trains, document forgery that provided safe passage for children fleeing detection. Together, the three women became a unit that blended instinct, intellect, and courage. Hanny's bright hair, so easily noticed, forced her to adopt disguises, dyeing it dark, wearing glasses, changing her appearance at every turn. Yet her visibility never deterred her. She moved with careful audacity, carrying papers, weapons, and intelligence across neighborhoods patrolled by German soldiers, always calculating her risk, always protecting those she loved. The trio's morality shaped their actions as much as their skills. They killed when necessary, but always within a framework of conscience. When tasked with operations that would have required the kidnapping of children as leverage against Nazi officials, they drew a line. Freddy's words were firm. "We are not murderers of children. Resistance does not cross that line." These were not empty words but a moral compass that guided their decisions in a world where the line between right and wrong had been obscured by fear and survival. Winter stretched into spring, and each mission carried a greater intensity. They traveled across fields, through frozen canals, into the outskirts of towns where the enemy's presence thinned. Every step of travel, every approach to a collaborator's home, every patrol they evaded became a study in tension, a test of endurance, judgment, and nerve. Freddy's mind catalogued every alley, every tree line, every shadowed corner, each a potential ally or threat. Truus's presence beside her provided reassurance and coordination, a shared rhythm born of trust and repeated trials. Hanny's calculations and observations ensured that their efforts were not wasted, that each mission achieved maximum effect while minimizing risk. And yet, despite the intensity of their actions, moments of reflection were inevitable. Freddy often felt the quiet weight of death settle over her in the dead of night, the cold seeping through her apartment walls as she remembered the faces of those she had spared, the families who slept safely because of her decisions. There was grief, too, for those who could not be saved, for the incompleteness of their struggle, for the moral compromises that war demanded, even of the young and resolute. The sisters' lives were a constant negotiation between action and conscience, between the necessity of resistance and the preservation of humanity. They moved with a purpose rooted in the protection of life rather than vengeance, a distinction that defined the character of their resistance. Every act, whether sabotage, assassination, or the distribution of illegal newspapers, was imbued with both tactical and ethical consideration. Their effectiveness relied not solely on skill but on their adherence to this principle, on the awareness that survival was not enough. One had to act in accordance with the moral imperatives that defined them. Each mission ended with careful retreat, often on bicycles winding through canals and narrow streets, blending into the fabric of the city as though they had been no more than ordinary citizens. The winter air, the frostbitten sidewalks, and the distant echoes of soldiers' boots all bore witness to their passage. The tension never fully abated. Every moment held the possibility of detection, yet every success reinforced the delicate power they wielded in the shadows. Their story in Haarlem, and in the wider Netherlands, became one of courage tempered by conscience, of youth transformed by necessity into agents of survival and morality in a world dominated by cruelty. Life after war. Freddy and Truus survived, but recognition was delayed. Post-war Dutch authorities largely ignored them because of their communist ties. Truus became an artist and memoirist, commemorating the resistance. Freddy married, raised children, but the memories of war never left her. Every year on May 4th, Remembrance Day, the nightmares returned. In 2014, decades later, both sisters were finally honored by the Dutch government with the Mobilization War Cross for their service. Freddy was 89, Truus 91. For the first time, someone officially said, "Thank you." Freddy and Truus carried the weight of their actions for the rest of their lives. They had killed, but they remained human. They refused to kill children, they mourned every life they ended, and they remembered the lesson their mother had taught them. Always stay human. During World War II, millions lost their humanity, but these teenage girls proved that courage and conscience could coexist. Freddy Oversteegen, Truus Oversteegen, and Hanny Shaft are remembered not for the number of enemies they killed, but for the humanity they preserved while fighting monsters. This story is just one of many untold tales from the war. For more incredible, true stories from World War II, subscribe to WW2 Impact.